Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic Odyssey. So I went to Blue Moose yesterday. I couldn't help it. I had a little bit of extra cash on me, and you know it's my favorite place. It's a little oasis. So I was like, what the hell? Why not? So I went and I bought another batch of movies that I have never seen before. And I started to, I got a stack of movies. I got about one left over that I had not seen yet. And I watched that. I haven't watched that movie yet. But I bought a handful of movies I have not seen before. So super excited. And, every now and then, the thing that I've talked a lot about around doing these videos is I love taking chances sometimes, and especially with my buying habits with movies, and I've been doing that a lot. I still buy movies that I've seen or that I love, or I find an edition, a Blu-ray 4K copy, or like I did a bunch of videos recently on a bunch of movies that I got at Goodwill in Rockland, and they were on DVD, or they are on DVD, and those are great. And those were quite a few movies I had never seen before, so that was a really great discovery. But what I try to do, my priority as far as being a fan or a film fanatic or as a collector, is to buy all of these movies on Blu-ray and 4K, and to try to, my goal, because I love, you know, my goal was to really beef up my whole horror exploitation collection. I buy movies and I watch them all. I don't just buy them and, do shows on movies that I haven't seen, or movies that I will get to and talk about them, or talk about what I heard about the films, but I haven't actually seen them. I just watched a show recently, and again, it's one of those things where it's complicated, but it's like a thing. It's a weird thing for me. I watched the show recently with a guy that I like. I have this. I don't know what it is. I have this super love hate relationship, and I'm finally realizing that I probably shouldn't watch the show because it gets me. I like the show a lot in a lot of ways, and then other aspects of the show, I watch his videos, and I watch, he uploads videos fairly often, and on one side of thing, on one hand, I really like the videos because he reviews a lot of newer videos, or a lot of newer movies, particularly horror films. And I like that aspect of it because I like to try to stay current. I like to, see what's coming out. I love seeing new movies. A lot of the times, I'm a little bit late to the game because of my viewing habits with, I don't stream anything, and, I don't go to the movies as much as I used to. I still try to go, but it's been a little while. It's been a hot minute again. It's been probably about a month or so now already, but whereas like in the past, I used to go to the movies almost every weekend. So it's weird, but anyway, it's funny. And the guy's show is his name is Cody Leach, and he's one of the biggest guys on YouTube. And he's a pretty smart guy. I think he's pretty knowledgeable. He does love films. And and again, it's all about opinions, and it's all about, people's views and their personal, and people should be able to express themselves however they want to without, obviously hurting people's feelings or being an ass around it. And but also being sensitive to the idea that how people can react. But then the other side of it is that, it's okay to be honest. But so it's a funny thing. I have this really funny relationship with this channel, and I think I've made this decision around it. not that it means anything at all in this world, but or not and for that matter, not that it's like an important thing at all, but it's just a personal thing. So on one hand, I really love his channel and I love his videos because he does do a lot of coverage of newer films, and that is one way that I check on and stay up to speed with new films. And on the other side of things, a lot of the times I watch his videos and then I'm like super frustrated, and I feel really disgruntled afterwards. And I'm like, why does that keep happening? And it happens time and time and time again. And I don't know what it is. It's a really weird thing. Um, and it's complicated because it's a I think it's a little bit of a tricky dance to a degree. It's not black or white. It's kind of like in this gray zone. And it's a funny thing because, well, like for instance, he did a show today, and the reason I feel like somebody like him is definitely open to criticism is because he is one of the biggest guys on YouTube. He's definitely one of the biggest guys. Chris Stuckman is probably the biggest guy on YouTube. I've never had any correspondence with him, but I really love the way he does the shows in a lot of ways because he's always respectful. Even when he'll have a movie that he'll review that's not necessarily his cup of tea, he's always very respectful, and I like that he does that. And again, I love his channel a lot because he does review all kinds of films, but it's still primarily horror films. But he really, for the most part, stays current with a lot of newer films. But there's something about his demeanor and the way that he does his reviews of where it can be something that is pretty outside or, kind of not the conventional format, and he'll say it's not his cup of tea, but he'll be very respectful of the filmmakers and still give his opinion. And I never ever watch his show and then leave it frustrated or just like aggravated. But when I watch Cody Leach's show, it's a mixed bag all the time. Sometimes I really appreciate it, but then there's a lot of times where I'm just like, what? Like frustrated. And so I often think, why does that keep happening? Why does that keep happening? Does something have to change for my habits, or is it something a problem that I have, or is it something else? My favorite YouTube guy that I talk about a lot is Mood616. He is a YouTube guy that's based in Canada, and he's my favorite guy on YouTube by far. And his whole thing is he really specializes. He does cover all kinds of movies, but his deep dive and his deep focus is primarily on the world of horror exploitation. And I have like discovered so many cool movies through his channel, and he's also brought me back to the table of rediscovering movies that I saw as a kid and also directors. And I have probably learned more about film from his channel more than anything else. And I'm always entertained by his show. I never come away from it frustrated or just like kind of outraged by some of the things he has said. I, I always feel like it's positive. And he, again, he's a very, very opinionated guy, but he still does it in a way that's like kind of light-hearted. It's not like he doesn't come across as a bully. He doesn't come across as like this negative Nelly about things. Like, I don't know. He's still like respectful, even on things that he kind of will trash. But with Cody Leach, it's different. I don't know what it is. There's certain times where I'm just like, I don't understand what's going on here. And one of the things, like he did a show recently that I just watched actually this morning of where he'll go out and he'll buy all of these movies, all these new Blu-ray movies, and half, pretty much every one of the film, almost every film, like for instance today, he hadn't even seen, and I'm just like, okay, that's cool, but why would you spend all of this time doing a show or shows on movies you haven't actually seen, and you're just kind of looking at it from a collector's standpoint? It doesn't make, to me as a fan, it doesn't really make all that much sense, you know. But that's I think relatively that's a minor thing, you know. And it's, I don't know, it's a funny thing, but one example, so like one example of why I get frustrated around his show is that, like, for instance, he did a review for a movie he just bought on Blu-ray, *Malignant*, which is a pretty decent horror movie. It came out, you know, it came out a few years ago, about, I think 2 years ago, and it's a pretty decent movie. I saw it. It came out 2021, and I saw it when it came out on DVD. It's a pretty good horror movie. It's pretty solid. It's by James Wan. James Wan is a very popular director. He's made, like, he was responsible for the Saw. He directed the first Saw movie and a few other Saw movies. That franchise I actually really like. He has he's responsible for the Conjuring franchise, Annabelle. He's made tons of movies. And then he directed, his last film that he did was *Malignant*. And then he also did another film which I can't remember, and I think it also became a franchise. Trying to think of what that was called, and oh, Insidious. See, I haven't seen any of those films, and I've heard that they're really good. There's like three of them, and I guess that's another trilogy. He also directed the Aquaman movie with Jason Momoa, which is kind of funny. But he's, you know, he's also directed The Nun, and he's directed some movies. Another movie he did, which I've heard is really good, and I haven't seen, Dead Silence, but I do want to see it. But some of his movies are okay. You know, some of his movies are not so great. I really love The Conjuring. Like again, I said, I really love the. I think overall, it's a really good franchise, the Saw movies, and he was responsible for that. Pretty solid, and I think some of the movies are really great, especially the second one, which is, I think, awesome. Probably the best in the franchise. And I really love The Conjuring. I think that's a really great film. The other movies that in that franchise, I'm not really a big fan of. I don't know. I just feel like it should have been one and done. I can't really buy into the other movies as much. And like he's had some movies in his career that are really kind of terrible. I think like The Nun is awful. Annabelle is, you know, kind of not so good. But anyway, he made *Malignant*, which is, you know, it's a pretty cool movie, and it's worth watching. I don't know if it's worth buying or giving it all this praise or acclaim. And the interesting thing about *Malignant*, it came out in 2021, was that that movie is very much like a retro movie. It, to me, it was tremendously inspired by a lot of '70s and '80s Italian horror exploitation movies. It really has this an '80s vibe to it, particularly around films of like I think, for example, like Dario Argento, Bruno Mattei, Lucio Fulci. It's got, you know, this real beautiful kind of colorful palette that's used for the cinematography. It's excessively gory, and it's also super bonkers and weird and strange. And it also, I think, *Malignant* also has a like a giallo vibe, And of course, the giallo is such a wonderful wonderful genre, and it's basically like the Italian version of like kind of like an Agatha Christie styled film, but different in regard to that English style where it would it has typically giallo films have copious amounts of sex and violence, but they're essentially thrillers. And one of the greatest giallo filmmakers, Sergio Martino, who is an Italian director, and also James Jess Franco. And I think *Malignant* definitely has that vibe to it. So in that regard, it's a cool movie because it feels old school, But the movie itself, I think, is okay. It's pretty good. Like, it's pretty bonkers. It's pretty gory, and it's pretty wild. But the story and maybe the ending, I feel like it's probably a little bit undercooked. But I think it's a pretty solid movie. And so Cody Leach was talking about that about *Malignant* today, how he had just bought it, and he was raving about this movie, saying how just incredible it was, and just how bonkers crazy it was. And the reason, and so I watched the show, and I was like, okay, yeah, that *Malignant's* pretty good. It's a pretty good movie. It's entertaining. I think I'd say for people to check it out, but I wouldn't buy it. I don't think I would. I would buy The Conjuring over it. I think The Conjuring's a much more. It's definitely more of a unique movie, and more of just the story is stronger. The film as a whole is actually pretty frightening. It's more original. But *Malignant*, I like elements of it a lot because it has that retro giallo, Italian '80s, exploitation feel. So I really love that. But Cody was talking about how he really loved this movie, and he recommends it. But he was also saying because of the movie, *Malignant* it's very different than a lot of other James Wan movies, and it's pretty bonkers crazy. It's kind of wacky, which is a characteristic of a lot of those exploitation movies from Italy in the '70s and '80s. And and also that's tied in with a lot of the giallo films that came out in the '60s and '70s in Italy. But the and I watched the show, and I was like, okay, that's cool. And then there was a couple of movies that he talked about that I like, and a couple of movies I really loved. But most of the videos he talked about were movies that he had never seen before. And I'm always like, okay, I don't. That's fine, but I just don't get that. But that's just my opinion. But the thing, so I watched the video, and then afterwards, again, that same thing happened, where I felt really frustrated, and I'm like, I was overwhelmed with this sense of like, okay, why do I keep watching these videos? And from time to time, it doesn't always happen, but from time to time, I watch these videos of his, and I'm so frustrated and so aggravated. And I'm like, maybe I should just not subscribe anymore and not watch these videos. So I think about it. And again, these are from maybe some folks watching these videos or whatever. It makes absolutely no sense to them, and that's fine. But this is just how my weird brain operates. Because movies are, very, very important to me. They're not just entertainment. So they are first and foremost, but it's a way of life for me. So I look at it a little deeper than probably most folks out there. Maybe a little bit too serious, or look at it a little too deep. But that's just how I naturally am. And I was thinking about, okay, why processing it, thinking why does that happen? Why does that happen every time? And then I started to realize, okay, I think I know why this keeps happening. And the reason is in previous videos that he's done, Cody Leach, and other, older videos he's done, and even videos that he's talked about, even videos that came out into the last year. There was one video in particular where he was reviewing the new or the newer remake of Suspiria that came out, which I haven't seen, and I heard it's actually pretty good. I haven't seen it yet. And of course, the original was directed by the legendary Dario Argento. I just recently got that finally on Blu-ray, and that movie is a masterpiece. I love Dario Argento. I mean, he's definitely probably the most popular Italian horror exploitation director. I think people who are not aware of 80s, 70s, or even 60s, who are not aware of the explosion in Italy and in Europe, for that matter, of all of the amazing horror and giallo films that came out, exploitation films. Dario Argento is that name that, especially Suspiria. That's probably easily his most popular movie, but everybody knows that movie. Everybody has heard of that movie because it's such an iconic movie. And I finally bought that on Blu-ray, and I love that movie. It's a masterpiece, and there's so many of his films I really love. Movies like Inferno and just so many great, amazing films. And I think he's definitely one of the most important directors in Italy. But so anyway, Cody Leach had done a show a while back where he talked about the remake. And I have not seen it. I heard it was pretty good. But before that, he was saying how, this was a remake of course, the Dario Argento original. He started talking about the original Suspiria. And then he started talking about how he's a part of this kind of video group fan chat thing, or a page. I think it's a Facebook page where he is friends with like a couple hundred people that are also big time horror movie fans. And he said that a lot of the times in this chat and in this discussion group, a lot of these guys that are members of this page always share movies. They always make these recommendations, and especially to Cody. And he said that most of the guys on the channel are really into Italian horror exploitation, from the 70s, from the 60s, 70s, 80s, especially around the 70s and 80s. And he said that a lot of these guys always make these recommendations of like, oh, you should check out Bruno Mattei, you should check out Lucio Fulci, all of these, and even more obscure Italian directors and giallo directors, and all things exploitation, but particularly like the horror exploitation world. And he said when he was reviewing the new Dario Argento remake that he's done that. He's checked out some of these directors. I think he even mentioned House by the Cemetery by Lucio Fulci, which is overall my favorite Lucio Fulci movie. And he said that he obviously had seen the original Suspiria, and he doesn't like any of those films. He's like, on one hand, he's like, it's not his bag. He just doesn't get it. It's not something he'd ever watch. And he just criticized it from top to bottom, saying, well, these movies, they just don't have no production value. The acting is terrible. The editing is terrible. They're really dated. And he just basically, more or less, trashed all of these films that came out in Italy and Europe from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, especially the 70s and 80s. And he basically trashed all of these directors. He basically trashed the original Suspiria. But he does it at a point of where even though these filmmakers were so prolific and are really respected by a lot of people, he does it in a way of where he's so dismissive and he doesn't give them any legitimacy. He doesn't give them respect. And I just, that's what irks me. And when I use Malignant as an example, is like that movie Malignant, the James Wan movie that he did a review on his channel. That movie is totally, all of the ideas, like there's nothing original about that movie at all. I think it's good and entertaining, but there's absolutely nothing original about it. And that movie completely borrows, if, well, I would say steals completely from those decades of cinema, the Italian horror exploitation world, especially that world. That movie Malignant just totally rips off that entire genre. And he'll praise that movie, but he'll like just completely dismiss all of the films and all of the directors that made that movie, basically. And it's not a case of, for me, it's not a case of if he, it has nothing to do with whether he likes it or he doesn't like it. It's the way he comes across when he doesn't like something, and it's his lack of being respectful, and I feel like he doesn't have any of that, and that's what. And when I think about it, and I've thought about it probably way too much, that's what irks me, is that he just doesn't have at least the respect and like give those guys, those directors from those decades, props. And he doesn't do that. It's simply because he doesn't like it and blah, 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 blah. Because he doesn't like it, he just dismisses it entirely and doesn't give it any kind of props. That's why I have come to the conclusion that as to why I feel so frustrated sometimes watching his channel. And I remember when that happened, I remember watching that video, and it came out like probably almost a year ago. I commented on his video. I remember commenting. I've commented a few times on his channel, and I try not to be an asshole. I try not to be a dick. I try to be totally respectful. But I commented on his video saying, that's totally fine. You can even hate these movies or hate those decades or just whatever. And the other thing, too, that Cody always talks about is he's always talking about his love of slasher films. But when I look at when he says slasher films, there's always this cutoff point. Anything before, say, 1981 or anything that came before maybe Halloween or maybe before, the first Friday the 13th movie, there's this cutoff point. After that, he doesn't go back any further it doesn't try looking into the movies that kind of influenced those movies. And it's like always fixated on just that time or that decade, but anything else before that, he won't give the time of day. And I had commented on this one video, and I had simply said, I tried to be respectful. I think I did. And I simply said, well, you can like what you like, and you can even hate these videos or whatever you want to do. That's totally fine. But I just feel like it would be cool maybe if you came across as, giving props or at least some kind of respect to I think, master filmmakers like Lucio Fulci and Dario Argento as examples. And just be respectful of those guys, because without those guys and a slew of many other directors, they helped shape the genre. They were integral to this beloved genre that we love as fans. Like, they really were ahead of their time. And that, has nothing to do with if you like it or not. And I addressed my comment that way. And there was no response and there was no dialogue. And I was like, well, if you want to talk about it, let's talk about it. Like, that would be cool to have a dialogue about this because, I think Cody Leach has a massive, massive audience. So I was disappointed with that. But I've kind of made the decision, and again, it doesn't really mean anything at the end of the day. But I've made a decision that I can't watch this channel anymore. I just can't because it keeps happening and it's just a source of aggravation and I just can't do it anymore. So it is what it is. So today's movie is one of those movies that every now and then I truly have this experience of, and I had never seen this movie before. Picked it up totally random yesterday. I went to the Blue Moose in Bangor and I bought it and I just was like enamored with the cover, the packaging, and what this movie was about. And it came out in 1974, wicked old school. So I bought it not, it was going to be my first time viewing, and I watched it last night, and I truly had this about maybe, I don't know, 45 minutes into it. I was literally like, what the fuck is going on? And I was just like, I was completely enamored with this movie, and I was completely 100% into it. But it had all of these moments where I was just like, what the fuck is going on? Like, this is fucking so awful and kind of a piece of shit, but just so captivating and so utterly amazing. And that is Shriek of the Mutilated. This movie is fucking crazy as hell. I never saw this movie before. It came out. Vinegar Syndrome put this out. Vinegar Syndrome is definitely one of the best companies out there that specializes in exploitation movies. This movie is like the epitome of low budget craziness. Like, and the whole premise of the story is pretty straightforward, or at least how it's described on the box. But when you actually watch it, it's actually not really. It almost has nothing to do with how this movie is marketed. It does to a degree, but basically what the scenario of the story is, it's about these four people who spend, and this one person in particular who is this scientist, kind of this scientist, but he researches Bigfoot and is on his quest to find Bigfoot. And him and four other friends, colleagues, go on this kind of adventure where they try to track down Bigfoot because there are all of these mysterious killings happening in this area of this town. And they decide to go to this cabin and basically stake out this area of where they're going to hunt Bigfoot and try to find proof that Bigfoot exists. That's the basic premise of this movie, but it's so freaking bizarre. There's like without giving anything away, there is all of these other kinds of stories going on to a degree. One example is that there's a guy, and these people go on this journey or this search to find Bigfoot because of people that they've talked to. And one guy in particular who survived this alleged attack by Bigfoot is, one of his friends was allegedly killed by Bigfoot. He witnessed it, but he escaped. He barely escaped. And the experience basically completely mentally fucked this guy up. And he becomes this crazy lunatic. And so one of the stories of the movie is about this guy and him just kind of losing his mind and all of the crazy shit that he ends up doing. And then the other centerpiece of the story, without giving this movie away, is that it's actually the people in this group, or the people in the story, are actually a part of this weird, like, I don't know, like a cult group that, are allegedly or supposedly tied to Satanism, but they're not really. But they're essentially like this religious cult, and they are this cult of where they practice cannibalism. So like you have that story going on too, and it's fucking totally crazy. Like this movie is so incredibly low budget, but at the same time, it's amazing. I love the transfer of this on Blu-ray 4K is so gorgeous, and because this movie has like it feels like it's almost three movies in one, and the reveal, without giving anything away, the reveal of the Bigfoot creature itself is just like truly a WTF moment. But because there's essentially like three movies to a degree in one, it makes this movie really disorienting, but in a good way. And it's astounding. Like it truly is an astounding movie because it's so terrible, but at the same time, this is utterly the definition of it's so bad it's good. And the transfer of this film on Blu-ray is just amazing. Like I kind of, there were moments of where I was watching this film, and I don't know what the budget was, but I can imagine it must have been incredibly low. And this came out in 1974. But considering how utterly crazy this movie is and just how low budget it is, it's really beautifully shot. And there's moments of where I think it's actually legitimately a great movie, and it's really entertaining, and it's like just so like completely ridiculous. And there were times where I was watching this movie, and I was just thinking to myself, like, how the fuck did this movie ever get made? And let alone get distributed by Vinegar Syndrome and get a 4K Blu-ray release. I was just like, what? Like, this is amazing. That something so trashy that, again, it's the epitome of that definition. So bad it's good. How something like this got made and is still around today, 50 years later. And this movie I love this movie. I just think it's so extremely absurd that it works. And I had never seen it before. Didn't know anything about it. I came across it randomly. I know I'm really familiar with Vinegar Syndrome's catalog. I have quite a few of their movies. They have a pretty amazing track record. Like pretty much every movie I've bought from Vinegar Syndrome, I have quite a few, have all been really awesome. So I kind of went on that. I think they have really great taste. But this movie is just, and it was directed by Michael Findlay. And um, I started watching his special features for this movie, and it's the special features are just unbelievable. There's an interview with the cinematographer, and this girl who they hired, Michael Findlay, hired to be the cinematographer, literally had no experience being a camera person, and he could not afford to find a regular. She was involved with the production, and Michael Findlay could not afford to buy or to pay a regular cinematographer, so he kind of forced her to film the movie. And she had no experience whatsoever. And she talks about her relationship with Michael Findlay, on how he was kind of this crazy, deranged person. And this movie is like uber violent. There's a lot of really brutal kills in this movie, and it's really great. And there's a lot of women getting cut up and killed. And she even says in the interview that if he wasn't a filmmaker, he would have been a a serial killer. Just crazy. I just started watching his special features, and it's yeah, it's completely nuts. And I can't believe that this came out in '74, and it was directed by Michael Findlay, who was an American filmmaker, producer, screenwriter. He created many low budget movies in the 1960s and 70s. He was, and he's also looked at as one of the most notorious filmmakers in the annals of sex exploitation. Crazy, crazy. And I've uh, I don't think I've seen any of his other films. But again, just this whole thing of like discovering, all of these films and all of these directors that I've never ever seen before or had ever heard. I might have seen some of his films before, but just wild. And apparently, he was a really big director during the '60s and the '70s. Um, he directed films, one trilogy that was called the Flesh trilogy. Um, he directed a film in '71 called The Slaughter, which was like I guess, an exploitation version of the Manson murders. I can only imagine. It's just got to be insane. He was also involved with a distributor with Alan Shackleton, who had this really horrendous reputation for being involved with snuff films, which where people were supposedly being actually hurt and killed during those films. I mean, just nuts. He directed Mike Findlay also directed a whole bunch of hardcore pornography movies. Anyone But My Husband, Angel on Fire, 1974, A Woman's Torment, Mystique, 79. Um, yeah, just totally nuts. And again, I never seen any of his films before. I had no idea who he was, and just amazing. Killing for the Culture, he also did, but his background was in the sex exploitation world. But just yeah, but I can't recommend this movie enough. It is just a totally, it's such a wild ride. It's so freaking entertaining. It's totally bizarre, and it's again, it's so bad it's good. I mean, this is the definition of that. This is one of the coolest discoveries I've made. 1974, Shriek of the Mutilated. Seek this movie out if you get a chance, particularly this edition. And again, like I said, I just watched this last night for the first time. The artwork is amazing. I mean, look at that, so cool. Um, and there are hours. There's like 3 hours of special features on here. All kinds of interviews with the actors, the cinematographer, people who wrote the screenplay. It's wild, and I just started watching, so I'm so excited to finish that and to dive into that even more. But holy shit, what a discovery! Thanks to Vinegar Syndrome, Shriek of the Mutilated. What a bonkers trip. So if you like this channel, please subscribe to this little weird thing that I do and keep the comments coming. Thank you, and have a wonderful day. Peace.